I'm on. Hello. Good afternoon. It's always hard to stop people talking. So I'm Denise Amyot. I'm President CEO of Colleges and Institutes Canada, and it's a pleasure to have all of you here this afternoon. And it's an honor to moderate this important panel. So for our association, Colleges and Institutes Canada, and our members, everything is about developing talent, developing skills, or reskilling for the labor market. And whether it's through WIL, work-integrated learning, training, applied research, etc. And as you know, the pace and extent of disruption is such that it is preoccupying all of us in this room. So this panel is quite timely today. So as a moderator, it's always a gift when you have the chance of having a link or connections with literally each of your panelists. So let me introduce them now to you. So I'll start by the order they have been placed. So Sheldon Levy, who is CEO of Next Canada, as you know, former Deputy Minister here in Ontario and former President of Ryerson University and Sheridan College, and a champion for innovation. So for each of them, I will mention a championship, and they don't know about that yet. So the second one, Cathy Kinloch, President of BCIT, a leading post-secondary education institution in BC. Championship, she is a champion of partnerships with the industry. Third one, my pleasure to introduce you to Zabeen Hirji. Zabeen is Global Advisor at Deloitte, formerly Chief Human Resources Officer at RBC. She is a champion of the future of work. Fourth, Linda Hasenfratz, President and CEO of Linamar, a diversified global manufacturing company. I have to tell you, she is champion for work-integrated learning, ensuring that post-secondary education students have work experience and to ensure that it is 100% of them that have WIL experience. So thank you, Linda, for that commitment. And the last one, GP Gladu, President CEO of the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Businesses and member of the Bingui Yashi Anishinaabe tribe. He is also a former board member of Colleges and Institutes Canada. Championship, diversity. So, now, let's start the conversation now. So, we have 5 panelists, that's a lot, by the way, in a panel. They each bring unique perspectives in the unbundling of the labor market, as we currently know it. And I have to say, when we spoke in the lead up to this event, resoundingly, the panelists were optimistic. They were not discouraged about what's coming. So, and as you know, when we talked about unbundling, if you Google it, you'll see it's the process of breaking apart something into smaller parts. Unbundling is done for a variety of reasons, but the goal is always to create a better performing company or companies, and in our case, better society. So, a reminder to use Slido. You already know how to do this. Just a reminder, the code is K352. And I do encourage you to submit questions, and as you know, it goes in a priority order. And if you tweet, don't forget to use the hashtag PPF growth. So the first questions will be for Zabeen. So to get us started, Zabeen, so what are the top 3 trends that are determining the future of work? Because you know a lot about the future of work.
Well, I think we're all still learning about the future of work, and that's the exciting part about this work. So let me perhaps frame this in the context of the conversations that we've had throughout the day, and really the key drivers of the future of work that we've heard about. The first one, technology is everywhere. We've talked about the massive growth of AI, of automation. The second one is demographics. We talked about longevity. And yes, that means that there are going to be, the ratio of retirees to working age people is growing, but it also means that people are going to work longer because they have to and because they want to. The other demographic factor is around the increasing diversity of the workforce. Diversity is a fact. Our focus really needs to be around inclusion. And the third one, which perhaps we haven't touched on, is the generational shift. Millennials in the workforce, the growth of millennials, 50% today, 75% by 2030. They have different expectations. And what are we doing from a talent perspective? And the third theme or driver of the future of work is this shift to a skills economy. So as I use that really as the backdrop, and you have all of those pieces coming together, what does that mean? It means that the what of work, the who's going to do it, the how it's going to be done, the where it's going to be done, is all needing to be changed or to evolve. And it does, and we've heard it so many times today, this calls for a very different level of collaboration across the different sectors. But importantly, it calls for us to move from talking about it, the concepts, the ideas, to starting to experiment, to really try some of these ideas that we have, to think big, to start small, and then to scale fast. And so, you know, as I think about that as the backdrop and the drivers of the future of work, the 3 themes to your question now on future of work that I think are germane to this discussion. The first one is really the importance of the fusion of technology, talent, and transformation. And so what does that mean? Those are big consulting words, I get that. And so as I think about that, it's really around, you know, we need to think about the human-machine collaboration. How are we going to work together? We heard in the AI breakfast this morning, humans are intelligent, machines are not. So there is an important role for humans, and businesses are all going to be thinking about how those two come together. The other thing I would say when we think about this fusion of technology and people, the conversations and the research has really been around what are the jobs and the tasks that could be automated. And that is absolutely the right first question. The part 2 of that is what should be automated. And that is a conversation that really needs to happen with this multi-sectoral collaboration that I spoke about, because we have to really, I think, avoid this technological determinism. We need to make those choices and then together get to the future that we want to create for ourselves. So that's the trend number 1. Trend number 2, which we've heard about, is really what I'll frame under lifelong learning. So what does that mean? How do you unbundle that? We've talked about reskilling a lot today, and I think the really sort of, for me, the big things there are, it's continuous reskilling. It's not about doing it over the next 5 years and then stopping. So how do we build the capacity? How do we build the culture? It takes me back to one of Katie's points around how do you really shift culture, which then actually could drive institutional change. How do we get Canadians and ourselves to really think about always learning as a really important part of our success? And so, you know, as we really sort of look at the reskilling piece, that's one, en masse. The other thing that we touched on a little bit today, but I'll build on, is the rise of human skills. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing employers really focusing more on that. And those are essential skills that are transferable: creativity, collaboration, communication, complex problem solving, empathy. And that means that universities, colleges, post-secondary educators have to, how do we come together with employers to really build that out? And work integrated learning is clearly one of the big pieces there. The third theme, I would say to your, to get back to your one of the top three, is the rise of the open talent economy. And what I mean by that is we are moving from the traditional employer-employee relationships to being the only way that workers engage, to an economy where we have contractors, contingent workers, freelancers, the crowd. And while we can debate what the right mix is, I think the focus really needs to be on how are we actually going to make that work? Because it's a reality. And so how does public policy and business policy and practices catch up to that? Many people are doing that by choice, and that's, I think, a part of the equation or the balance that also needs to be brought. It's not just because people have to work in those alternate work arrangements, it's because they want to. And so that, to me, would be the third theme around what are we doing not just to protect the employees, or the workers, which is absolutely critical, but what are we doing to ensure their growth? And what are we doing to ensure that that is actually enabling the growth and innovation of business?
It's interesting because recently there was an article in the World Economic Forum where they talked about this gig economy, and where 1/3 of people are already on that gig economy, and 55% of them, in fact, do lifelong learning and continue to learn in order to continue to work, which is very interesting. So maybe we'll switch, because you made allusions to policy. So I'll turn to you, Sheldon, because of your background as a former deputy minister and former president. So now that you've heard Zabeen with talking about those trends and what's coming, could you round out our understanding by sharing with us what does it mean from a policy perspective? So for governments, whether they are province or territories or the federal government, what does it mean? What should happen?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to this panel. And I guess my perspective on this is quite a bit formed by the time I was deputy minister, but it is no doubt also with my experience in post-secondary. So when you look at the data, one thing becomes very, very clear, and that is that if you don't have a good education, you have more and more possibility of being dislocated, out of a job, being taken over by automation, all of those things. So one whole policy area, and you have to look at it with an open mind all the time, is how do you remove whatever barriers are in the way to create an inclusive opportunity for everyone. And when I was in the Ontario government, I remember the one chart, and it showed that if you were in the lower income, you had a 20% chance of going on to university or college. Yep. But once you made it to even middle income, it went up to almost 80%. And underneath that, one chart became the changes in OSAP. And it was really a deliberate attempt to try to remove that barrier. But no doubt there are other barriers. But as we move to this new economy, automation, AI, and we see with our open eyes that people will be left out without a good education, it is even more on all policymakers to review every policy and always ask, what are the barriers that would give everyone an opportunity? So I would say that's one. The other one is the data that really shows the mismatch between what employers think with regard to students and graduates being prepared for the workforce, and the last number I saw was 17% when asked, are they ready? And then the universities and colleges say, the employer says 66% of the time they're not, and the universities and colleges say 17% they're not. So there is a misconnect between what the employer sees as needed by graduates versus the universities and colleges believing they do it. And I guess when I was in the deputy's role and saw in 1 month 6 private career colleges open in Toronto that was charging students quite a bit of money to begin giving them the skills that the students needed or thought they needed and the employers thought they needed to get into the workforce, I thought to myself, this can't go on forever. So I think another part of it is really the responsibility that post-secondary institutions have to ensure that the students are graduating with the talents, the skills to be able to move into the workforce right after their graduation and not think they have to go to another third party for their education. So I'd say that's number 2. Number 3 policy area is one where I think there has been a sense, and I will overplay it a bit, that we're going to solve all this problem by a whole lot of people who haven't got the talents in the workforce to exit, and then we will figure out a way to give them good severance, et cetera, and then we'll bring in a whole lot of people. Well, I think at Davos, where there was a pledge of 10 million people to be trained well in the workforce to be able to take the jobs of the future rather than a big exit and a big entrance plan. This is a big, big job, and I think the discussion at the last panel that no one really has this figured out well, and that doesn't mean some company might not have it, but how are we going to keep the businesses running while at the same time having a mammoth transition of talent? But I think you cannot have a society that has half of our people now worrying whether or not they are going to have the jobs of the future, as all of us, governments, et cetera, are investing in technologies that they look and say, well, thank you very much. You're investing in things that I'm not even going to be capable of doing. And this worry will just have a negative impact on everything. So we have to not only build the strategies, we got to be able to talk about it so that the workers today don't feel left out of the equation and they feel part of our attention. And the last one, if I could be a little controversial, and I say this with a tremendous amount of respect for colleagues. And there are certain types of jobs under which there's limited number of positions. And with the end of age 65, that we got to find a balance between young people that want opportunities and older people that gain and hold on to those opportunities. And this is a human rights question and all of those, and people have a great deal of difficulty talking about them. But I think we have to talk about that we have to be concerned about young people who want their way into the workforce and deserve that opportunity. Well, many of the positions are being held by people of my age that either can't take their pension or have pensions. And we got to find a balance and we got to respect everyone in this process. But to ignore this problem is totally unfair to the young people that want that opportunity. So I would put them into those four buckets.
Thank you very much. We could probably have a panel strictly on that question, so maybe for next year, or we may come back to this later. Because I want to come to you, Kathy, because Sheldon talked about the post-secondary, and he made allusions to this statistics and all that. So my questions to you is, how are questions about the future of work affecting how post-secondary institutions plan to be part, or in fact, I won't even say plan to be part, but are part of the pathway to success for young people, but also for other learners, because as Zabeen mentioned earlier, and as we've heard this morning, reskilling is so important also.
Well, it's a great question, and again, I'm honored to be here with these colleagues. I have to say that post-secondary is known not to be the fastest machine in the world to move, so this is a real challenge, and a gauntlet has been put down for us. But I'm optimistic. We can do it, and we should do it, and I like the concept of leave no one behind. Yeah. And if we work on that premise, it creates a burning urgency. And that's for industry as well. So if we work with industry and business and say, who can we not leave behind as we work together, then I think we'll move a lot faster. Having said that, there's a number of good things and great things that are going on in post-secondary. We need to change our educational models, and I think there's a growing recognition of that. They have to be timely, just in time, and for BCIT, if I use that as an example, 50,000 students, a number of our students are part-time. They've gone out into the workforce with a university degree, but they come back for that applied learning just in time, and then they're back out in the workforce again. In fact, 70% of our part-time studies are already undergrads, and then they're up to PhD level, and then they come in for that technical skill and the applied hands-on learning piece. That's one piece of it, but we also need to work very closely with business and industry that we serve. If, the gap in perception of readiness is a critical one, and if we don't get that right and we don't keep moderating it as well, we may think we've got it. We do a survey once every number of years. It's critical for us to have active program feedback, for us to be in the workplace with the students. In Polytechnic, our students are out in the work environment, so we see them, we're there with them. But actually at BCIT, what we're doing right now is sitting down with employers and really going through sector by sector. How are we serving you? What can we do differently? And we're going into the workplace to make sure that we're really being as relevant as we possibly can be. That should not be a one-stop, and for any of us on that. Another is to look at our whole relationship on the actual student who's coming in, the millennial. Their needs are different, and they need different support than what our traditional entry has been. So the number of, or the amount of investment we need to put around those students to help them be successful in the workplace in terms of the soft skills and we're already mentioned all the soft skills that are needed that are so critical to be able to function in a workplace are just so essential. And the last piece I'd add is we need to make sure that lifelong learning occurs. So this is not a one-stop shop, but we've got the doors open and entryways, and we're not so linear in our offerings, but rather we're horizontal, because today, my background's in healthcare originally. If I look at healthcare, technology is just as predominant in healthcare and that was never the case before. We go through every sector, and we need to retool those sectors or our offerings so that it's horizontal and not just linear in our traditional course offerings. So those are a few ways we can move forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Kathy. So maybe that's a good segue to go to you, Linda, because Kathy talked about the importance for post-secondary to work with the industry, and she talked about retooling, and you're running an organization in manufacturing, so it's all about retooling also. So my question to you is, what are the lessons learned so far for Linamar with respect to the future of work? And how do you ensure that an organization like yours continue to be competitive and innovative?
Yeah, so from our perspective, certainly we're seeing the workforce changing dramatically real time. So I look back 10 years ago, we look at our employees in two buckets: direct, which are folks loading and unloading machines, and indirect being basically everybody else. 10 years ago, we had 2 direct employees for every 1 indirect. Today, only 10 years later, we're at 1.3 to 1, and every single year it's changing and shrinking. At the same time, we are dramatically growing our organization. I mean, today we're almost, just in Canada, almost 10,000 employees. 10 years ago, we were around 5,700. So we're almost double. And just in the last 6 years, we've grown 20 or 30%. But where we've grown is very different. So I mentioned those statistics because I think it's important to realize that jobs change. That doesn't mean your workforce is shrinking. In fact, our workforce has grown dramatically. We've just grown a lot faster in our indirect jobs than we have our direct jobs. So direct jobs have still grown in the last 6 years, something like 15%. But indirect jobs have grown at 30%. And by the way, make 70 or 80% more than the indirect folks, right? So, I mean, it's a great opportunity for people to take on new positions, gain skills. We spend a lot of time and money developing those skills and offering opportunities for training and for our people, as do many Canadian companies. Actually, I was just reading some statistics around that compared to 2 years ago, Canadian companies are investing significantly more in training than they were at that time. Many are partnering with academic institutions. In fact, 83% are partnering with academic institutions in some way. And actually, more feel that AI and automation will create jobs than eliminate them. And I 100% agree based on our own experience. And it was interesting, Zabeen, when you were talking about what could you automate, what should you automate, I would add to that, what must you automate? Because there's a lot of people who don't want to do a lot of our jobs. You know, like we are finding it very difficult to find direct employees. Obviously because unemployment is at an 18-year low, but also because people aren't interested in doing those jobs. And it's not just here in Canada. In our business in China, we can't hire people to do production jobs. They just don't want to do that job. They want other jobs. So we're actually being forced to automate in China, even though the payback isn't really what we want it to be, but we have to automate. So, you know, I hear all these concerns about, you know, the streets being lined with, you know, unemployed people because their jobs have been automated. I actually think, thank God for the automation, because otherwise we wouldn't get production out the door. You know, the same thing with truck drivers. I mean, people talk about how many people make a living as a truck driver. And are worried about automated driving taking those jobs away. We can't find truck drivers. I mean, we've got a trucking division, and we're not alone, that people just don't want that job. They're not interested in that job of being on the road, tiring, away from your family, et cetera. We can't attract enough people into it. So I think, thank God for the automation, because otherwise we wouldn't get done a lot of the things that we need to get done. And I also think that it dramatically improves productivity and wait times in all kinds of different industries, not just my own. I mean, I look at, you know, you need to get a scan, you know, so you have to wait months and months. I mean, if you can be more efficient by using AI and ML to read those scans, be more accurately, get more done, then maybe we won't all be waiting so long for our MRIs.
Wow, good. Thank you very much, Linda. This brings me to unemployment and people that are at risk, because Linda, you just talked about the fact that, you know, there are some people that are not interested in some type of jobs. There are other people, though, that would like jobs, but nobody is thinking about them for all kinds of reasons. And unfortunately, that may mean when we talk about the future of work, what could happen, what may happen to some Indigenous peoples. So the question is, we don't want them to be excluded. We talked about reconciliations. It does include economic reconciliation. So, GP, how can policymakers, Indigenous communities, and businesses work together to ensure that nobody will be left behind, as we talked about earlier?
Thank you, Denise. And again, it's a pleasure to be up here. And before I get going, I want to recognize that we're on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit and the Haudenosaunee, and the traditional territory as well as the Huron-Wendat. Yeah, we definitely don't want to be left behind. And I'm so glad hearing from you that I'm excited about the future, that there are hopefully going to be more jobs being created as a result of all the AI and manufacturing that's going on. I just want to pick up on what Sheldon was talking about. When you were talking about the income of families that actually point to the success, educational success of the families that are lower income versus the higher income. And as you know, the Indigenous community, we suffer from most of the ailments, lowest and highest incarceration rates, lowest education rates, unemployment rates, et cetera. And so I'm excited about the future, but we are at risk of being left behind. And largely it's because our educational systems from K to 12 are funded by the federal government. And our children receive 50, 60, 70% of what most children in this room receive for their education. And what that's resulted in is that many of our students at the, if you're, Paul Martin and the Martin Family Foundation Initiative, he tells this great story. By the age of 3, if you haven't learned to read and write, your ability to succeed in life is significantly diminished as a result. And so they've done some really cool stuff in their literacy program where they actually went into 2 First Nation communities and went in and tested them, and 13% of the kids in grade 3 were actually passing versus the provincial average of about 70%. So this needs to change. So they actually did this pilot project. They went in and they turned that around significantly. After 5 years, those same 2 communities were tested, the grade 3s, 81% passed, exceeding the provincial average of 70%. Mm-hmm. And what I want to read here, I wanted to write it down. I wrote it down because I didn't want to mess it up, but the chief of Kettle and Stony Point, these are his words, and Paul Martin talks about this. He says, "You didn't think that they could do it, but look at what our kids can do when they're given the tools for the job." And I think there's preconceived notions about who we are as Indigenous people and what our capacities are. Well, I hope this dispels one of the myths that we're not intelligent. It's a capacity issue at our community levels. And I love your question and framing it around what can businesses do to inspire higher education rates. If we look at the whole value chain in the country, and we look at the Indigenous economy, we contribute about $30 billion to Canada's economy, about $12 billion of that coming from our Indigenous businesses, and that seems pretty incredible, but it's still only about 1.5% of the total GDP, and we are close to 4.5% to 5% of the population. But when you look at the business portion of that, you look at companies, and I'm really glad with Minister Marneau, they're talking about Kinder Morgan, because this is really important. Syncrude, Suncor, and Imperial Oil, they spend $1 billion a year on Aboriginal procurement, Aboriginal businesses. So you talk about empowering families so that we can better support our children and our community. Fort McKay First Nation actually enjoys an average per capita wage of $73,000 a year, which is $22,000, $23,000 more than the average Canadian. And I've been in the communities up there, and you can see the socioeconomic impact that has. So if you're a family with wealth, to Sheldon's point, you've got more options and you've got higher success rates. So how do we tie in the whole value chain to support the fastest, strongest, youngest growing demographic in this country, which is our Indigenous community? So those are some basic policy shifts that I think this country can be doing, and they don't really cost a whole lot. So it's about driving down supply chain. So when we have this program within CCAB called PAR, Progressive Aboriginal Relations, and part of it is about human resource development. What are your targets? Where are we now? Being realistic about where we are as a country, or where we are as a company in the amount of Indigenous people that we employ, or the number of Indigenous people that are being succession planning, the skills development, all the way up to management, C-suite, board of directors. These are the types of things that companies and the country starts to need to shift. Because half of our population is on reserve lands, and half of our population now is in the urban centers. So I see that as a real gift. I see the Indigenous population as a real opportunity for this country to capitalize on as we develop, hopefully develop some more of the major projects, which 17% of our GDP is reliant on when we talk about major resource projects. So that is a significant part of our country, and our people have a significant role to play in it.
Okay, good. Thank you, JP. Most of you, or all of you, seem to be relatively positive about the future. So my question to you is, and I say relatively, my question to you is that, what do you do when people are negative about the future of work? So how can you answer that question? So I'll turn to you, Zabeen, and to you, Linda, because you probably have workers that are worried in your organization, that are saying, oh, why should we bring that automation? So how do you answer them?
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly. I don't think our folks are worried about the automation. I think they welcome it. Because A, they know that we're constantly looking for people. So I don't think that they feel like their jobs are being threatened, because they can see that we're constantly growing our workforce and growing our business. And that if automation takes on a job that they're doing, that there's other more interesting, better paying jobs that we can offer them instead. So I think people welcome that. In addition, I would say that there are many of the roles that we are automating are not the most exciting jobs, so they're not, they may not be enjoying that role to the extent that they could if they were doing something that was a little more interesting in terms of maybe programming or tooling development or process development or logistics or other roles that we have a constant need for. So I think for both of those reasons, they don't feel threatened because they see that we're growing, there's always more opportunities and more jobs. If they want to continue to doing an unskilled type job, if they do like that type of a role, we still have those jobs. I mean, we've grown the direct jobs by 15% over the last 6 years as well. So there are those jobs available as well if that's what they're looking for. But there's also opportunity for them to do something new and different, and programs that we're offering to help give them the skills to do it.
Okay, good. Anything you want to add, Zabeen?
Yeah, so maybe just building off that, I think we need to be transparent with employees and with Canadians in general, so that we can partner. This shouldn't be. I do understand that there can be fears created from that. People get worried, but that transparent conversation is around. It's a balanced conversation around bringing a lot of the positives, acknowledging that change is hard, reminding people that we've done it before. This is at the scale and the speed is I think different. And then how are we going to support them through that change? And it's about giving people lead time. And to me, that transparency, and there are some organizations that are starting to do that well and actually using AI tools to identify the roles and the type of work that are at risk, and then engaging with those employees to reskill or to give them time to make choices. But we talk about a lot of the different stakeholders or different sectors. Employees I think, increasingly need to be a part of that conversation, and that will help in terms of them taking ownership and feeling supported to move forward.
Maybe this will bring me to the lifespan of people, because we keep talking about reskilling, the importance of continuing to learn and so on, to ensure that nobody is left behind, but to ensure that the people that are there, despite what you said, Sheldon, earlier, continue to learn throughout their career. So my question is, how can policy empower individuals, in fact, to keep learning or even retrained as industries are disrupted? So, Kathy, could you address these questions from a post-secondary education perspective? And because I've been at your institutions, I've seen the age of people, and it's not your 15, 18 years old that are in your institutions. So there's a lot of reskillings going on. So could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So to go to policy, I think that that's a bigger issue than just post-secondary. That's an issue, though, that needs to be addressed. From what are the incentives and what can government do to help support workers come back, so that there's that understanding of what is, if you will. And that conversation, I think, needs to happen sooner on a national platform, to start to take away the fear piece and to assure people that it's not just going to happen tomorrow. To Linda's point, people aren't going to walk out the door, but there's going to be a process, and we're all going to work toward enabling people to come back and to learn as they need to. And obviously, it's not going to work 100%, but let's just take the fear piece down a little bit. So from a policy perspective, I think within post-secondary, let's look at credentialing a little bit differently. And that's a pretty hallowed area. So in BCIT, what we're starting to do is saying, what can we replace and how can we recognize as well prior learning? We have started some years ago a program where we recognize prior learning and then start to build on that. If the students have industry experience, they've managed people and all of the criteria that are in there, then they are shot into a higher level of learning, and particularly in the business area, because they've got the people skills, they've got the soft skills and the assessment that goes along. Our reservists is another example across Canada where we've spread that experience. So those are just some examples, but in the trades, anything where there's a lot of experience in the prior experience that's relevant, I think the more we recognize that, and it just doesn't go to direct experience, it can also be experience in community, experience in an area. For example, we work with the First Nations in working with communities to apply the smart grid. We would never be able to do that without the experience of working with First Nations. So what are the strengths that people bring or the students bring, and how can we build on that and move that forward? It sounds simplistic, I know right now, but it's very dynamic, and I think we need to keep changing as we see the level of graduate that comes and also their work experience.
I'm so glad you talked about the importance of prior learning assessment, because so often we see people, in fact, repeating over and over what they already know. And it's time that we say no, enough. And maybe we need a national bank of all the prior learning assessment tools that exist, or by job, and so that instead of each college, each polytechnic reinventing, or each university reinventing the wheel, we would have this huge national platform that where we could use it, and then people, instead of doing a 3-year program, could end up doing it in 1 year. And when we talked about productivity, maybe this could help to improve the productivity, because we would have workers that would have the skills and be ready to take those jobs that Linda was talking about. So this brings me to something, again, from a policy perspective. Disruption is there. It's not that it's coming, it's there, it has arrived. So what does it mean for changes in EI, in pensions, in benefit? Because we keep hearing about this gig economy. I've mentioned the World Economic Forum at 1/3. They say, I believe, that by 2027, it will be the majority of people that will be on this gig economy or open economy. So Sheldon, you have been in government, so what do you think should happen to the EI, the benefits?
I thought you were going to leave that question to someone else, so The one thing I learned in government that for sure you can have a great discussion on policy and everyone will agree on it, and then you try to write the procedures of this, and it is much, much more difficult than you've ever imagined. And in the most basic issues, you could agree that it's the importance of retraining well in the workforce. And we could have a great policy, then it comes to, okay, what is the responsibility of industry versus government? And then you get into the discussion, well, if government pays, are you just replacing the money that industry would have paid?
Yeah.
And then you get into the issue, well, an industry will gain that for their own need. And I'm not blaming anyone because that's just the way it goes. And then the policy becomes more and more and more complicated. And at the end of it, no one understands it because everyone's trying to figure out the way to make it work, when in fact the policy is quite clear, but the procedures become extremely complex. And then we say, why did it take 3 years to roll out and why didn't it work? And in some ways, that's what you get into when you even talk about the most basic things like the gig economy and pensions. Mm-hmm. You might have a new RRSP idea.
Exactly.
But to be able to execute that in across Canada from coast to coast to coast with such a variety of individuals and circumstances becomes the biggest job you've ever imagined, yet the principle is not probably difficult to get to. So for me, when I was in government, I thought the issue was the complexity of the procedures, not the policy. And we would have a big discussion on policy, but we would never be able to have a discussion on procedures that would be able to minimize all the complexity. But it's very, very clear that you got lots of things working in directions that go opposite to each other. You got an economy that is now trying to say that having defined contributions is yesterday's business, and you should have defined benefits. I mean the reverse. You should have defined contributions, not defined benefits. You got, as I mentioned, an age 65 issue where you have to take your pension by law at a certain age, yet you want employees to come in, and my concern about employees coming in at the other end. And then you got the EI issue under which you're in and out of the EI system in a gig economy that was probably never imagined when the policy was set, with this proportion of the people moving in and out. Yeah. So it's just to say that these are brand new issues, not in the ideas, but in the magnitude or the proportion of Canadians that are going to be into this. And then you have two groups of people. I don't want to simplify this, but you have a group of people that have had experiences and expectations, whether they are with regard to the way pensions are or with regard to EI. And then you have a whole new generation that doesn't have expectations, but looks and says, why can't I have those things that used to exist? Mm-hmm. And somehow in this, you also have the fairness issue that you have to deal with of intergenerational. Why can't I have what my dad or my mom had? And the truth of it is, you can't, because the economy is no longer structured that way.
So what will it take then?
I think a big part of it requires really, really honest discussions with Canadians at the beginning. And I think having honest discussions in this world of fake news is probably the most difficult thing we have going. To be able to have good reporting, good analysis, and a sharing of these challenges rather than everyone being an advocate and blaming someone else for the problem. I don't think you'll have change unless there's a deeper understanding of the changing nature of employment and what that means for EI, what that means for pensions, and what that means for the individual. And mom and dad and son and daughter, whoever they are in the family today, has a chance to talk about these things. And it can't be the elite only talking about them.
I agree with you, and I think we need to have something being done, though, even if it is on a pilot basis somewhere in the country where we could try Because when you think about, those people that are on the gig economy and that they work steadily, but they have many employers in bracket, so why they could not have the chance to own a house also? Just because they don't have a secure job, but they may have worked more in the last 5 years or earn more money than someone else that have a secure job. Yeah. So I think it's not fair, honestly, and we owe it to this gig economy to begin to look at other models where we would offer an alternative to the EI. Maybe there's a special amount that could be given from the amount that is earned in the gig economy. Anyhow, we won't enter into that now. Yes, Kathy, go ahead.
Jump in on that, and it's not on the policy side. I agree with that. It's a challenging, more than challenging, having worked in government as well. It's a pretty endless circle to keep going around. The policy is easy, it is a procedure. What I think, though, that we can amplify is the work integrated learning that's going on through business higher education. And Linda's a star example of that, and so is RBC, because they are creating hope through their messages of this is what we can do as employers. And this is how we will handle the situation. And I think if we can adopt the model or adapt it as it needs to be, and the messaging as well, and work together on that, I think that creates some momentum. Yeah. And it starts to educate, because I don't think we can do it nationally. I think it needs to be by example, yeah. And then creating the opportunities and following through and delivering on them as well.
I like that, and talking about it so that others follow. Yeah. So I'll turn to you, GP, because we hear that the jobs of the future are mostly related to STEM. And you and I were talking about that earlier, and you were quite excited about the potential new A with respect to STEM, which becomes STEAM, and A stands for art. So what do you think, how could this happen if we would graduate people that in fact would have the full STEAM?
I might be a living example. I have a Bachelor of Science. I have no idea how I got it, because and
I'm a biologist.
Yeah. I struggle with the sciences, as do many of our communities. And again, the reason why we struggle is because we don't have the strong infrastructure behind us to support us in our English and math. But what's really fascinating, what I got all excited about, is a lot of Indigenous people are very artistic. And then you're also reading more in the papers about the value that the Indigenous worldview has, whether we're talking about environmental protection, whether we're talking about even governance systems, community governance systems. And so there's this whole knowledge system which is going to be incorporated, I hope, into the way we do business and the way that we educate in this country. And I guess what excites me is it provides a platform, because if you ever put a bunch of engineers, when I did my MBA at Queen's, we had our team, and the engineers think one way, the more artsy people like maybe myself think a different way, and so it's that diversity that breeds a strength. But if we can create more of a platform for STEAM, where the education start to cross over boundaries, where we get to actually learn more about, as an artist, maybe more about engineering, or an engineer more about artists, then it creates more understanding, which that we can have those honest conversations about all sorts of issues, I think. So STEM and STEAM, I think, I love the idea of having the A in there. Again, I think it's just, it's a confidence builder as well for Indigenous people, I think, that have traditionally come, and we look at our stats, and a lot of our people go into the fields of healthcare, social work. We've got a lot of great lawyers, but we haven't seen a lot of the science outcomes yet. So hopefully that'll be encouraging, and get more of our people into the sciences.
Yeah. It's interesting. I forgot which country, but there's a school at the elementary in a Nordic country where they've eliminated completely all the disciplines. So they work with project, and it's nothing, the students don't hear anymore about, literature or grammar or language arts or mathematics. It's all about there's an issue, there's a problem, what can we do about it? Let's have a story about it, and let's make it bigger, and so on.
Yeah, and if I can just build on that a little bit, we also need to think about kind of decentralizing everything that we do. I have a 14-year-old daughter who's struggled in school in the traditional system, so she's now in Montessori school, and so she's one of those 20%er kids. And so putting the care and control of our children and getting parents involved and getting the businesses, and we've talked a little bit about this earlier, making sure that our businesses are talking to our community colleges and our universities to make sure that we don't have those wide discrepancies as far as expectations when you come out of school and what the employers think. But the other thing that we also need to think about is geographically, how we learn. One of the challenges that we see is, Toronto's a great city, but a lot of the education here is fantastic, but you get northern communities that come and get here and educated. It's almost like a brain drain because the impetus to go back is not as strong. And that's amplified when you think about the Indigenous communities that don't have infrastructure and a strong economy to draw back that individual. So we need to really rethink the way that we actually deliver education and the skills and training to make sure that we can capture that skills talent, that skills pool in a region that is developing. Yeah. The last thing that we want to have to do is start to import workers, because that's inefficient when you think about a business. So just tweak the way that we actually deliver our education and skills training as well.
It's interesting. Yesterday I was in Matane, Quebec, on the northeast side, and there was a class of 15 people, but there were only 6 that were there physically. The 8 others were in different parts of the region, and they were taking their class like this, and they had a good time. Linda, you wanted to intervene.
I just wanted to jump in with 2 points.
Yeah.
Number one, I totally agree, diverse teams are better. You have to have perspectives you have to have thinking from different perspectives to come up with good solutions. If you have teams of only engineers, it's never gonna work, much as I love engineers. And frankly, science and engineering is not for everybody. I've got 4 kids. I managed to get 2 engineers, but 2 of them it's just not their thing. And that's okay, because we need those perspectives in teams. And it's diverse teams that think differently, that come up with great solutions. I think what's important is that in the arts and other disciplines, that we teach some of what make engineers really great at what they do, like critical thinking, problem solving, linear thinking, working with a team, taking something you learned here, applying it over there. These are great skills that is part of what makes engineers and scientists so interesting to banks and, a bunch of other organizations that suddenly woken up to the fact that engineers are great problem solvers and stealing them all from manufacturing companies. Thanks. Thanks for that. Which brings me to point number 2, and that is for anybody who is, who does like science and math and is intrigued by those areas, we should absolutely be encouraging every last one of them into STEM, because so many jobs are going to be STEM related for all the reasons that we've just been talking about, all these technologies that are evolving, and we need people who've got those programming skills and those problem-solving skills and the technical skills to be able to run a very different business. And that's true across the board, not just men, but definitely women. And we need to get more women interested in a career in STEM, and that's an area that I've been doing a lot of work in as well. As a matter of fact, I happen to have some recommendations just here, if anybody's interested in them, around how we can encourage more women into STEM. I think it's an area that actually has been growing. We've seen great results, in fact, in the last 5 to 10 years. We've seen massive change. In fact, I only have to look as far as the University of Toronto, where the engineering program is 42% women. which is amazing. I'm really proud of what they've achieved and spent a lot of time in developing these recommendations, which came out of the Women's Council that was mentioned earlier, to learn about what they did and what other schools who have similar results have done, and those recommendations are included here. So I think we need to tap into the entire population, men, women, Indigenous, immigrants, everybody, to get as many into STEM as we can, because so many jobs will be there. And then the ones who that is not a natural inclination for, let's just change some of the things that we're teaching to help give them the skills for the workforce tomorrow.
So because of your intervention, let's go to Slido. There's a questions, in fact, that touch exactly about STEM and K-12, kindergarten to 12. So I will read the question. So how can we prepare youth in K-12 for the future of work? And there's a sub-question, that has disappeared. Should governments be investing in youth STEM skills development outside of school to prepare them? So who would like to tackle this one? Kathy?
I'll start. I think I'm going to avoid the government piece, so over to you, Sheldon. So absolutely, we should be building this in right from K to 12. And looking at the system from K to 12 and how, from a post-secondary perspective, how do we interface as well? How do we expose the students and create the opportunities for them, particularly in high school, but not just high school. So UBC is here in SFU, and they do great summer camps. They expose the students early, so do we, and we're growing in that area because you just want to create the enthusiasm for learning and the curiosity as well that these programs can offer. We particularly are focused on high school. We are in high schools, particularly high schools that have a low economic status. We purposefully go in there. We work with companies like SAP. We go in, we do robotics or whatever we can do to promote initiatives there so the students are exposed. And we offer them scholarships. So as they're coming out, we kind of pave the way so that if they're successful, there's an opportunity for them to come forward. That's just one example, but there's many across the system, and I think we need to really look at the whole K to 12. High school, I think, is getting it much quicker because they know the interface that's needed. It's now how do we tie the K to 7 or 8 or whatever the year is in the respective province so that there's a continuum. I think it's happening. It just needs to be enunciated.
I fully agree with you, and I think also it's the job of parents to ensure that, whenever they buy toys, it's also linked to STEM, so that it stimulates the interest in going into those fields. There's an interesting question that seems to be quite popular with people right now. So should businesses play a greater role in training employees? And if so, what type, poor government, there keeps being a second question. If so, what type of government programs could be used to incentivize businesses? So go ahead, please.
I think the first question is almost a rhetorical question. It's a yes. I think it's also about extending the definition of training, though. We often, a lot of the conversation is around reskilling, training because they're not going to have a job or there's going to be a lot of automation. The practice of internal mobility, I think, is under-leveraged in organizations, in the private sector and the public sector. What people learn by moving to different roles within the same organization is very significant. And, I come from an organization, I spent my whole career at RBC, and 20 to 25% of people moved into new roles every year. And people are astounded and often get to, well, oh my God, that's a productivity drain. You've got to retrain these people or train them some more. And this is not just the right thing to do. It is absolutely the smart thing to do. Firstly, people in organizations, and particularly this next generation, they want to work to learn. Yeah. They want an organization where there are learning opportunities every day. And it's not just about the formal training, it's a lot of the informal experiential learning. So it is critical to talent strategy to get the right people and to keep them engaged. Yeah. The other piece is there is also very direct bottom line or top line revenue impact. What you see when you move people around in an organization, they have a better understanding of how things work in that organization. That means that they can draw on that, and if you're a client-facing organization or serving the public, you can actually bring more of that organization to the client, better serve them, and create more economic value. So this is, there's so much, and it's something that everybody can do and do more of. So I certainly would put that out there as something to scale. In terms of governments, the role of government, one idea we've touched on this. Sheldon talked about sort of on the benefits or pension side, an RSP idea, but maybe there's an RSW, a Registered Skills for Work program that really gets funded by employers. There could be a government component, and there could be an employee component as well that has some kind of matching, and the mechanics are certainly the hard part. But think about it, employers today, in terms of benefits programs, it's really become part of what many employers do. This is even, just as critical for people's success during their working lives. Yeah. So is there some sort of an idea that doesn't have to be overly managed and overly proceduralized that helps with some of those, the financial incentives, but it has to be a partnership. I think it needs to bring business, government, and employees into that picture.
Thank you, Zabeen. That's a good one. I'll go to the next questions, but first I want to share one with you, Sheldon, and maybe people could go in a certain corner and you could tell them. The question is the following: where can the millennials apply to Sheldon's job? So it's not clear if it is your previous job or your new job, so we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's a very, very good question here. So tell us the best policy change or program that you have seen make a difference to people's education and or employment. That's an excellent question.
I'm going to answer, I'll comment on that, but also make the point, which is very consistent with Zabeen said, is that we have to really keep in mind that there's so many SMEs that don't have the similar types of characteristics and opportunities of the large companies. And therefore, some of the things that we're now prescribing can work for someone as big as the companies like RBC, et cetera, that just are not feasible for a company of 4 or 5 people. So all of our policies have got to be thought through with regard to recognizing those companies. But the types of policies that I've seen that have made a big difference have been those that have been deliberately made to be absolutely clear in purpose and remove all of the confusion to those that they are intended to support. And my favorite example was when the Ontario government made it very, very clear that education, or the cost of education for the poorer folks, were going to be free. You could have said it was going to be less debt. You could have put in a lot of if statements into it. Yeah. But those if statements would have not been interpreted or understood by those audiences that you are trying to direct it to. So when government is going to implement a policy like that, there's a level of risk that it takes in that it is being so general and so clear that there's always 1,000 different asterisks that will go with it. Most often, the policy is stated with the asterisks, and the audience that it's intended to doesn't even understand all the asterisks. So one of the things I would say to policymakers is to really, really think of the clarity of the message, and that there is going to be a level of risk, but that level of risk is worth it in order to be able to get the policy instrument to the audience intended in a very clear way such that it is executed. If you begin with all of the if statements, it misses the audience. And I thought the message on OSAP was a great example of government taking a heck of a lot of risk in removing all the if statements to have a very clear message to its intended audience.
It's a good example, Sheldon, and what is great is that New Brunswick followed after and have a similar policy, and let's hope that other governments will continue, because free tuition in this country for post-secondary is certainly something that would help a lot of people. You have another example, I believe.
I wanted to talk about a program that I've seen and I've been involved in since 2000, and it's up in Thunder Bay. It's the Outland program, and basically it's a company and a group of companies with the support of government where they fly in Indigenous youth from the northern communities to experience all sorts of things that they wouldn't normally be exposed to in the region for the summer. And you can apply this to any culture. It's all about exposure. It's about being inspired to learn something, and something outside of your normal day-to-day. And the normal day-to-day in the First Nation youth are so atrocious sometimes with the high suicide rates of 12-year-olds. So just to put an asterisk on that. The point is that bringing these kids into the Thunder Bay region and we get them exposed to financial literacy, we get them exposed to the college system, we get them out tree planting, we get them out in the mining sector, we get them out to doing drones, exposing these youth at a critical age when you can go, sometimes I wonder if my daughter is possessed or not. In a time when, youth are looking for something.
Yeah,
and so we've got to show them a path. And we've got to show them that there are opportunities beyond their current circumstances. And so that program has yielded some incredible results where these First Nations youth, and it's been going on for 18 years now, are now becoming these great leaders, go on to post-secondary education, are learning new skill sets. But it takes all of us, and I think we've all talked about that, it takes partnerships to make sure that we're getting in front of them.
That's a great example. Other examples that the others have? No?
Could I maybe just say, I think Sheldon raised a really good point around SMEs. And some of the thinking there, I think, is around, can we actually build platforms that allow smaller employers to actually be a part of this, to create that talent mobility, for example. It's probably a good business idea, actually, for startups in this room. Yeah. But those, that would be one way, because this SME, the issue is so different, comes up in so many different, in so many different discussions.
I'll give another example that I saw, in fact, that I heard about last week, which linked work-integrated learning that we talked about, that is important, links STEM or STEAM that we talked about, and it links to a role model, as JP just mentioned. It is a program that is trying to go across the country now, by which students that are in post-secondary institutions, whether colleges, polytechnics, or universities, they go and spend 10 hours in high school or elementary school, but linked to their field of study. So if it is arts, or if it is engineering, or if it is cooking, and so the students get familiarized with that, and they are paid to be with those students. It's a fabulous, fabulous program. And what it does, it motivates those students to be more curious and see, hey, there are jobs that may be of interest to me. So that's certainly something else. We'll go to one of the Slido that seems to be at the top. It has been at the top since the beginning. So I believe I need to listen to the audience. So gig, oblique, precarious work is hardest on at-risk populations. So businesses benefit from contract work, but it places greater burden on governments. How do you address this? Anybody wants to tackle this one? It's not an easy one.
It's probably a question that needs to be tackled. I think it goes back to this open talent economy.
Yeah.
Is a reality. We can debate the mix, but how do you actually make this work? And that goes to some of those, Sheldon's point around these honest, courageous conversations,
exactly. Yeah.
Which need to happen cross-sectorally.
So maybe panel for next year. Okay, so, or maybe a position paper at one point by someone in this group. So another question that seems to be popular, what are your thoughts, that's a very good one, on employee global mobility? Can I exercise the prerogative of being the moderator? So I will add, what are your thoughts on student global mobility? So employee and student global mobility, and should it be encouraged or discouraged? So this, I think, would, all of you could answer this one. Linda?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea. It's something that we actively do within our company and encourage, is to have more of our people take the opportunity to work internationally. We've got lots of growth happening internationally as well as growing here in Canada, so there's no shortage of opportunities where we want some of our people to go and bring the Linamar culture and our technical and leadership knowledge. And we really encourage it because I think not only is it helping us to have them go and help create the right culture in that new company, but they also learn enormously because you learn a lot living, working in a different culture. And I think that you learn to deal with people, you learn to understand that dealing with people who are not from the same culture as you is different. And you have to have different sensitivities to that. And when they come back, they're much better leaders because our workforce is extremely diverse. So there's people from all kinds of different cultures and countries that are working for us. And if you want to be a leader at Linamar, you will be leading people from all kinds of different backgrounds and cultures. And the more experience that you have had at how to manage that and how to be sensitive to those and appreciative of those other cultures, the more successful you will be. I would say that would absolutely extend to students, that similarly you would have that same learning experience of being in another culture, learning a little bit differently, and just have a better appreciation that the way that you do it is not necessarily the only way or the best way, and an appreciation of doing things differently.
I love to hear that you think as an employer it is important for students also. One of the issues is that right now it's still only 2 to 3% of students in the post-secondary that in fact go globally. So Sheldon, Kathy, GP, you want to address that?
Well, I think if there's always been the idea of what you could call a student passport of credits.
Yep.
And I think a lot of the reasons students don't go, they might be financial, but it's also the sense that they're leaving a year out of their studies and they're not getting credit from their home institution, or it's difficult. But if there was a way, and I don't pretend that it's easy, that there was a competitive program for institutions that wanted to put forward a strategy for the global passport of education.
Yeah.
and that students can pick up credits that were shared and multiple degrees on their transcript by the institutions they went to, because I agree totally with the comment that Linda made about the importance of mobility of students and employees, and to have more of our students see the world as part of their education, and government put in a program, put in money, put in the encouragement for some sort of global passport for students would be fabulous.
Yeah, there used to be programs like that, and we need them to be back.
Just a quick note, if I can, on that. So I fully endorse what Sheldon's saying, and I think the students who do go, they come back so enriched and so contagious that you just, I'm sad that we don't do more of it, and we need to expand it.
Absolutely. I wish I could give you more time. Unfortunately, the letters on this keep getting bigger and bigger. Wrap up now, and soon it will blink. So I'm really sorry. You were fabulous panelists. So I want to thank each of you for your insights and also for making this panel so interesting and lively. Thank you very much.
Thank you.